Everyone. We are talking today with Holly Toronto, and I'm already just laughing with Holly right now about virtual learning and how these interviews can be so good to talk with people. And I'm so excited to talk with Holly. I can tell she's passionate, very passionate about this subject matter. I can tell she knows her stuff. And we also have like a good amount in common, especially around spiritual communities. And so let's just start hearing about Holly's journey, and then we're going to dive into some like kind of some questions around BMI, some issues around eating disorders and spiritual communities, and we're just going to see where this conversation takes us. So Holly, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, Jared, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, just a little bit of background around me, or like what I do. I'm a certified master level health coach. I specialize in body image and intuitive eating. And really what that means is I help people take their power back from harmful dieting and beliefs about their body so that they can put their energy towards creating a life that they're proud of and that they enjoy living, versus being on this like constant hamster wheel of trying to make your body smaller. So like that's a little bit of a background about what I do. And the way that I got into this work, there's many different intersecting paths that led me to where I am today. And I'll try to share like the snippets of the heroine's journey. But I love that you mentioned the spiritual communities, Jared, because my upbringing in evangelical Christianity was very formative to my relationship to my body. And, so many different intersecting factors for people as you're listening to this. Like you can consider your racial identity, your gender identity, your ethnicity, your background, where you're from, your religion, your spiritual upbringing. Like all of those actually play a formative role in the creation of our body image, which is our body image is how we are seeing ourselves within the context of society, measuring ourselves, comparing ourselves to other people, and understanding like, where do we fit in, right? So my journey started in evangelical Christianity. I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. During the height of what's called the purity movement. And so the purity movement, for anybody who's listening, who's familiar with this, you know what I'm talking about, the overarching concept, invitation behind that movement was for teens to save themselves for marriage, meaning no sex before marriage. And if you did do that, if you gave into your desires of your flesh, you were dirty, you were bad, your body was wrong. And so with that, there's also a lot of messages that come up in the Christian faith around not trusting your body's desires, and the flesh is sinful and the heart lies. Yeah. And that was really like the foundation of my relationship to my body from a very young age. And that manifested itself in, my teens, like going through puberty, those very formative times where we're really starting to understand our sexuality and our relationship to our bodies, that I couldn't trust my body, right? And that manifested as like a really disordered relationship with food, and really just a complicated relationship with my body, where I actually genuinely hated her. I hated my body as a teenager, as I'm sure many kids can relate to.
Yeah.
Many people can relate to. So fast forward, moving to New York City when I was around 18 years old, I pursued a career in the fashion industry, which obviously very image-centric industry. And I started to unconsciously and consciously deconstruct from evangelicalism, and sort of separated myself from that, and seeing like, hey, like, I'm not really sure that that's my truth. I'm not really sure that like those, like, I identify as someone who's very spiritual, but this sort of dogmatic way of acting out my spirituality wasn't really in alignment with me. And so I started to move away from my faith, but like that underpinning of purity really stuck with me. And I saw that manifest probably in my late 20s, after having struggled with female adult acne for most of my life. I got to a point where I wanted to take a more holistic approach to my health and explore the quote unquote clean foods movement and the pure foods movement, and like cutting out all of these foods from my diet. And I was working with a naturopathic doctor to uncover if there was anything that, any sort of food that was like impacting my skin, right? And so we went on, I won't name the diet, but like it's the standard anti-inflammatory diet that like, that's very popular these days. And I was supposed to go on it for about 6 weeks. And then there was supposed to be a plan back for integration. So I was going to cut out these foods, see if anything triggers acne. It was never meant to be permanent. Well, that 6 weeks came and went, and there was no plan for integration. And I ended up staying on this diet for probably about a year and a half. And in that time, a few things happened. One being my skin did not clear up. So my skin did not get better on this diet. But what did happen was that I lost a lot of weight. And I got a lot of praise and a lot of accolades from people in my life for being able to do that, for being able to lose weight, do the thing that women and people in general are supposed to do. And there's this moral superiority that comes with it, right? Which for someone having grown up in my background, like that was like, oh yes, I've done the good thing. And I did it in this way that was like, oh, it's the clean foods movement. So it seemed like it was like, oh, I'm doing something good for my body. Yet something really insidious was happening under the surface, and that I had honestly a very disordered relationship with food. So I was socially isolating. I was constantly stressed and anxious around food. It was manifesting itself in my health, and that I was also losing my hair. You know, I had kind of gone towards veganism, and I had started to lose my hair, and my hormones were getting a little bit wacky, and I had digestive issues, and I became a health coach because of that. So, and my dog is barking right now. I apologize for that. I mentioned to Jared earlier that my dog is out of sorts today. But yeah, so I became a health coach because of that diet, because so many people were like, oh, how did you do that thing? How did you lose all that weight and quote unquote get healthy? Can you help me? And so I got my certification, and I built my business off of that. But again, all of this stuff was happening that I really wasn't acknowledging. And the biggest turning point happened for me when I was on a trip with my husband. We were in Alaska on a cruise. And anybody who's ever been on a cruise knows you eat, right? You have access to food 24 hours a day. It's delicious food. There's so much that I had previously deemed off limits and I hadn't allowed myself to eat was like suddenly in front of me. And I found myself every single day just like panicking, and I had stomach aches, not from like the food, but from like how anxious I was feeling. And I actually said to my husband, like, here we are in this beautiful, beautiful, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I'm saying to him, I will never go on a trip like this ever again.
Oh man.
And the only reason for that was because I felt like I couldn't control the food, right? It was genuinely because of that. And like, if I were to eat that food and I were to let myself really enjoy that vacation, then I would put on weight. And when I came back and people saw that I put on weight, I would lose all of the praise, all the accolades, the business that I had created. And so as synergy would have it, I brought one book with me on that trip. It's the same book that's sitting behind you right now, the Intuitive Eating book. Yeah.
I love it.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know who told me about it. I don't know how I found out about it, but I was like, oh, this is I was obsessed with reading about health and wellness. And I was like, oh, this book sounds interesting. I'll read about it. I'll bring it on my trip with me. And it was exactly the book that I needed on that trip. And I was reading it and I saw myself so clearly in it. And I came back from that trip and I started to implement those principles in my life. And that work brought me to the work of body image healing and understanding, health and weight are actually not synonymous with one another, and really starting to deconstruct that in myself. And, it took some time, but I got to a place where I ended up completely shifting the focus of my practice to help women and people heal their relationships to their bodies and food.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh. I feel so much on like what your experience has been like. And thank you for coming on and sharing that journey. I'm so curious too. One thing that I really relate to is just the fact that a book, how powerful can a book be?
Yes.
How powerful can a book be?
So many books that have like literally changed my life.
And they can be in serendipitous ways too. It's strange how we begin this journey. It does feel very serendipitous. I remember reading a book on mindfulness and that got me into the Zen monastery and changed my life, but I don't remember how I got the book.
Isn't that interesting?
It's weird. But, so I'm really curious. I know that body image is principle 8 of the intuitive eating workbook, and that's become like your focus, right? Yeah. And you said something very interesting in the beginning, that body image was kind of how we see ourselves in society. And
Mhm.
I really liked that description. It was more than just like how your body looked, but how you belonged in society.
Yeah.
And you're speaking to this right now with the weight accolades. You belonged when you were thin. The fear was that you didn't belong. You lose that belonging. And to shift into this new way, like, I mean, you had invested in a business, you had this background in purity, and this food thing was working for you. Like, to me, it seems to do the 180 seems incredible. Like, what were your first steps in in really doing that 180 and doing that 180?
Mm. Oh, yeah. I mean, the first step I would say was like putting myself in the middle of the ocean with like what better way than to take yourself out of your environment, right? Like the environment where you feel like most comfort, and putting yourself in a really uncomfortable situation, like in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship, around all of these things that had felt really triggering. Like that was the first thing for me. But it came with like a decision in many ways, like a decision to recognize that that health, like my physical health, um, was not the same as my weight. Like I had to really deconstruct that and like make the decision to pull those apart, because as long as I was going to be pursuing health from this like weight normative, weight loss perspective, I was going to be in a disordered place, right? So it really started with me doing that work to deconstruct those two as the same thing, which was probably the most challenging piece. I stayed stuck there for a while because there's a lot that goes into that. In our society, thinner bodies are privileged bodies. And I say that knowing that I live in a thin body and I have a lot of privilege when it comes to my body. But it's always seen as like the moral, the right, the good thing to do to lose weight, to be in a smaller body. And I really had to like take that apart and start to like first do that for myself, but then do that for everyone else in the world, right? So like if it was true for me, it had to be true for everyone. And so I had to like work to dismantle fat phobia within myself. So when I saw other people's bodies, when I saw bodies that were larger than mine, and to be like, those are worthy, like that's a worthy body. That is a good body, right? All bodies are good bodies. Same with bodies that are smaller than mine. Like that is a worthy body. That is a good body. And like saying like that, like looking at that body and not saying like, that's an unhealthy body, right? That's a good body. That's a worthy body. I actually have no idea what that person's health status is, because you can't tell someone's health by looking at them. But yeah, I would say like that was the first thing, like the decision to separate myself from the fat phobic narrative of that's so dominant in our culture.
Yeah. And like, it seems like you were actively, like realizing I think we all carry these judgments that we've picked up culturally, like certain size bodies, bigger bodies. There's these implications of being lazy. And it sounds like you were actively catching those judgments that we can be conditioned with. And you were saying, you know what? No, like that body, I don't know what's going on. Health is not determined by size. I don't know. Everybody's worthy. I love that message. I love it so much. And then when you started challenging that on yourself, how did your behaviors change?
Yeah. So my behaviors changed in that I actually started to care for my body.
Aww.
It's very sweet, right? It's like I started to see my body as a person, right? Not an object. And this is something that I learned from another, like I would consider her a spiritual teacher. I don't know if she would consider herself that, but her name is Jamie Lee Finch, and she's an embodiment coach, and she talks about moving from objectification to personification of the body. So we talk about our bodies as it's, right? Oh, or it's a vessel, or oh, it's a temple, or oh, it's a machine. But our bodies are none of those things. Our bodies are actual living, breathing human beings, right? And if you think about like moving, when something's when something's an object, it's so much easier to want to manipulate it or hate it or want to change it or shame it, versus if it's something, if it's someone, right? Someone who is a human being, who has emotions, who has feelings, who's worthy and deserving of feeling good and being taken care of.
Yes,
That
yes.
like that was like probably one of the biggest shifts for me. And then from that place I started to approach my health from a weight neutral perspective, meaning I ate in a way that felt intuitive. I eat in a way that feels intuitive and it feels good for me, and there's a vast variety of foods and things that are really pleasurable, and I move my body in ways that feel really good, and I manage my stress, and I sleep well, and I have nourishing relationships, and I'm focusing on my health from that truly holistic perspective versus like, oh, following this pure food plan, and then that's also like how I teach my clients to care for themselves as well, because that's the ultimate outcome when we shift away from dieting and weight loss and needing to change and manipulate the body to the humanization, the personification of the body that actually leads to even more nourishing self-care.
Absolutely. That must have been that shift from the, giving, like, first of all, nourishing your body is such an amazing shift. I remember first learning about compassion and thinking like, treating my body like a car engine, vroom, 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 vroom. Like, it's not the best idea. It's just, my car is not, my body is not a car. I remember, and like the way I was treating it was like a computer, or a gas pedal, press forward, press forward, press forward. And this element of compassion, which I'm relating to, it was sort of the bridge, this personification, this compassion. I've never heard of the personification before, and I love it, by the way.
Yes.
I love it. Yeah. Like
Changer.
shifting that relationship to yourself, where yourself is not an object and you're not demeaning it, but speaking kindly to it.
And the biggest shift there too is shifting from it to she. So now I refer to my body as she, and that's what I encourage all of my clients, like she, he, they, right? However you identify, to really move from like this body is like this this something that's separate to like she, he, they.
Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful.
Because embodiment is like really some of the core, like the core of this healing work.
Oh yes. The body image is just the gateway. That's what I always say in my work. It's the gateway back to your body, which is living embodied in your body in partnership with her, him, they. You're spot on with that.
Absolutely. And I imagine when you listen to your body, like all the stress relief is kind of easy, and or not easy, but like easy to accept, right? But when you're coming from this pure background, and sometimes people come from various backgrounds, but basically these rules, these purity rules, these food rules, this can really tie people up, because everyone's on board with getting more sleep. Everyone's on board with, wellness or whatever, right? But then
stress management,
but then it's like
these
food rules can be so, what's the word? They can be
enmeshed.
So like,
it's just
like
sticky. That's what I'm getting. Just like deeply ingrained in us.
Yeah. So like food wise, how did you were following this diet for a year and a half. How did you start to, quote unquote, let go of food rules and really like listen to your body? And you said get a variety of food, and that's such an important thing. What was that journey like?
Yeah, that is, it was a long and winding one, to be honest. Like it was one that I had to like, because you're like, it's so, sometimes we don't even realize the rules that we're carrying around food, right? They're just totally. So like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that like I had that rule. I'm eating off of a smaller plate still, right? Because smaller plate means you eat less food. And it's like, that had become such a habit. I just grabbed the smaller plate and I'm like, oh, actually, like, no, I can eat off of a big plate because I can trust myself to like eat as much food as my body needs and stop when I'm full. Like I don't have to worry about controlling it through the size of my plate. So like, that's just one example of something that came up for me, like years into actually doing that work, where I was like, oh my God, I have another food rule. So like, I want to preface this by saying like, it can feel really overwhelming for people, and not to expect perfection of yourself overnight, that you're going to just be like, I'm done with food rules. But the thing that was the first step for me was to stop like referring to foods with labels, right? So taking away things like pure, clean, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, right? And really shifting towards, in the same way that I look at weight as neutral, food is neutral. Like food is food. Food is neutral. All foods are neutral, right? Different foods do different things in my body, but none of these foods mean anything about me, right? I'm still a good person, whether I eat peaches or pizza or donuts or salmon or whatever it is, right? Like I'm still good. I'm still a good person. And so really removing those labels was key for me. And then what that helped me do was to get out of the cycle of restriction, right? Because as we know, and you know, my experience with food is like, I didn't really have like the restrict binge cycle, which I know so many people do. And some people don't actually have that. Some people can just stay in the place of restriction, and it leads
you were
down
tortured.
That path
you were
of
tortured
like,
by restriction.
Exactly. Yeah. You have like so much self-control. And like, I say that not from a place of like, that's a good thing. It's just like, it's actually it's leading down the path to an eating disorder in many ways, or in like orthorexia and things like that. But so much of our relationship to food, and I know this is such a common experience with many of my clients, where they have this like, I'm going to be so good, right? I'm going to only eat healthy this week, right? Yeah. And then when it really happens on Friday night, right, they quote unquote fall off the wagon. And then it's like, oh, I was so bad. I ate so unhealthy this weekend. I'm so unhealthy. And just thinking about like what that actually does to us, right? Like to like, our relationship to our body is that it like takes us out of trust, right? Because we're always trying to control. We're always trying to like, and then we end up in a place where we're in reaction to that control, right? So we're trying to control, and then we fall off the wagon, and then we're in reaction to it. And so, and you know this as somebody who teaches intuitive eating, moving away from like the rules and the restriction and the labels, I really had to come back to a place of unconditional permission to eat. Right. And from that place, like unconditional permission to eat, so many people feel like that's like, oh, I'm just going to eat all the quote unquote bad things, and then I'm going to like X, Y, and Z is going to happen to my body. And it's like, no, unconditional permission to eat, right, is about putting you back in the driver's seat, putting you back into like a place of like autonomy and agency in your relationship to food, where you're no longer in reaction to restriction or binging, right? You're no longer in reaction to diet culture's rules. And so you're acting from this place. You're treating your body from this place of like agency, autonomy. Oh, like, okay, I can calm my nervous system right now. And from this place, right? From this really calm place, food is neutral. Yes. I'm allowed to eat whatever I want, whenever I want it, right? Nothing's good, bad, healthy, unhealthy. From this place, what would I really like right now? What would feel really good? What would taste really good? What would smell really good? What would feel really good, right? It's like one of the words that I'm always using with my clients is like sovereignty, right? Like this is you acting from a place of complete sovereignty. Trust in your body, that your body knows, that you can trust your body to tell you what she wants, what he wants, and when you've had enough, right?
Absolutely. I resonate so much with this because for me, like learning about mindfulness and you know, people have different associations with the word mindfulness, but oftentimes, unfortunately, people think they kind of interpret it as controlling. But I think the real definition of mindfulness includes this kindness. It includes an openness, and it includes the calmness. I think the calmness is so important. And I love how you mentioned that step, like kind of precedes the unconditional, like getting to that place where, you know, in mindfulness, they say non-judgment. And that means like a negative thought comes up, a positive thought comes up. It's all kind of the same. You notice it, but you're not really reactive. It's there. It's there. You know, we're not, the thoughts are not like, they're there.
Yes.
And from this calm centered place in my body where I love the personification too. I feel like that's so good.
Yeah,
that is so
You're
good.
Gonna want to sit with that for a while. I know
that
people are gonna want to sit
like,
with it. Yeah.
he, what does he want? What does he want? Like, you know, okay, that food isn't bad. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not whatever. What do I want? What's going to feel good? And that open-ended question. And I love it. Oh my gosh. I love it so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it. I see how you kind of reworked it. So deconstructing these beliefs around body image, that's the heart of your practice now. That because people um like, I guess, like, what on your own healing journey you could have done anything. You could have been like, hey, I'm like, what made you zero in on body image specifically?
Mm. I think it's because it was such a big part of my own journey.
Yeah.
Like, I went back and I looked at, I'm an avid journaler, and I've been journaling most days, with the exception of maybe like a couple of year break when I just wasn't really tuned in spiritually or connected to myself, since I was like 12 years old.
Hmm.
And I go back and I revisit those journals, and I see like this poor sweet girl who just like hated her body from like such a young age, and never felt free from that. Like, it was so enmeshed with like my worth and my confidence and what I would even allow to be possible for myself.
Hmm.
Right. So like, so much of like my happiness, my joy, like what I wanted for myself was riding on me having this like perfect ideal body. Like, oh, on the other side of like having this ideal body, then I'll be X, Y, and Z. Right. And so missing out on like the joy and the fulfillment of like the life that was here for me now. Right. And so once I started to recognize like what a strong hold my relationship to my body had on my life, and how much bearing I was giving that, and then how much on the other side, how much freedom I got to experience when I was able to like release that, right? When I was able to like know my body is good no matter what she looks like, and how that like opens up just so many possibilities in my life. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this with other people. I have to.
What sort of like possibilities for you opened up, and what possibilities see your clients opening up as well, as they say, I am not going to judge myself on my body. I'm going to, do this. I'm going to stand up to these negative thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, I want to tell some client stories, and then I can share one of mine as well. But one of my clients, she had grown up in the musical theater world. So acting, singing, dancing, all of that. She went to school for it. And after college, she was like, okay, this is my career. I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to like be on Broadway. And she had so many, and I don't hesitate to use this word, traumatic experiences auditioning, in how people would talk about her directly to her about her body, and what that did to her self-esteem, and what that did to her ability to actually like pursue this as a career. She ended up leaving, right? It became like so messy for her. And she entered the personal training world, and she was, doing like, it's kind of like a standard shift for many people.
I did that too. What the hell?
Like, yeah, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. And she ended up putting herself back into an audition space within the fitness world. So she was auditioning for a fitness company that shall remain nameless, even though I want to call them out really bad. But they told her that her body needed to be as aspirational as possible in order to get the role. And so she took that charge, and she went on to really extreme diets. Of course, I will not mention those diets either. And she lost a ton of weight. And she showed up to the audition, and it was like, nope, you still don't get the job. And she said like, it was almost like instantly, like that week that she found out she didn't get the role, it was like all the effects of the diet hit, right? As we know, metabolism, like her metabolism broke, right? Like she gained back on all of the weight and then some. She lost half her hair. She lost her period, right? Like all of that happened in like 1 week. Damn. And that's when she was like, okay, I gotta do something about this. And then she found me, and we had to work together to like pull all of that apart and really process what had happened to her, and like come back to this sense of like deep, unconditional, inherent self-worth, while also like healing her relationship to food, weight restoring. She ended up, getting her period back, her hair grew back. But the most beautiful outcome for her was like, we still actually work together to this day, because there's so much work to do. Like, and we've done a lot more like spiritual coaching and life coaching beyond the body image stuff at this point, because once she felt like she'd gotten to like a really beautiful place in her relationship to her body, she was like, oh, I actually want to go back to acting. Like,
Oh, wow.
that is the deepest passion of my heart. Like, I love scene study. I love like, like dialogue in a scene. And I love being in front of somebody and working up their energy. Like, she loved that part of it. And she had given that up because of all of the messy body image stuff. And so she decided that she was going to go back and start taking acting classes again, but from a place of like, this is for me. This is for my self-expression. This is for me to like, to, you know, be the fullest expression of myself in this lifetime.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there's like story after story of like, that's a really big one, but like even something as simple as like for some
hanging
of my
out with your friends.
Exactly.
Too. Yeah, like
wearing the clothes that you want to wear, going on the vacation, like so many things, like feeling confident to like, I had another client who like demanded a promotion for herself, even though she was told that there was no possibility. It's like, that's what this work can really open up in someone's life. It's like when we stop the comparison,
when we
judgment.
Stop the self-hatred. When we stop the self-hatred, when we stand up to the self-hatred, the self-hatred, the shame, all that stickiness, it's sticky. It's very sticky. But I think there's always like, I mean, coming back to spirituality, we'll come back to spirituality and spiritual communities, but coming back to the real spirituality in this is like, you know, deep down, I feel like we are able to recognize like, hey, I wouldn't talk to someone that way that I'm talking to myself.
Yes.
I wouldn't hold myself to that high of standard. Like we all have an ability to be aware and to see how we are treating ourselves and to say, hey, like that doesn't feel right. And I think 99% of us have that ability, and it's there. It's there. And you know, the inner light, right? The inner kernel that's always there. It's always there.
Yeah. We just have to access it.
Yeah. And I love the personification coming back to that.
I know. So good.
But I do think like when you were talking about the personification, like my body's with me, I'm in a relationship with my body has its own person. And like I could imagine like someone in like a yoga class, or maybe they're doing a meditation class or whatever, and then I can imagine saying like, as much as they believe that on one hand, like, okay, I can't have any gluten, you know, I can't have any, you know, too many carbs or whatever, you know? So I feel like there can be a divorce between the personification, the body, and then like these food rules. So, because you mentioned earlier, there was a lot of, you know, eating disorders in the spiritual community. Can you kind of elaborate on this?
Yeah. And as you're saying it, and like, I'm drawing this parallel between like the purity culture environment that I grew up in,
yes,
and how that manifests itself beyond sexuality, right? Like diet culture and purity culture are deeply intertwined with one another. Good, bad, pure food, unclean, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like purity culture didn't just affect evangelical Christians, like it impacted everybody. Like it is this expectation that we have of ourselves of perfection and purity, I think it's like another manifestation of our body image, like of a poor relationship to our body, or like a challenging relationship to our body is like, okay, well, it's like, oh, I can accept my body and I can be loving and compassionate towards my body, but like I still in some ways reject my body or don't trust my body or expect a lot from my body. And so I see that, you know, and again, like I cannot speak for every single spiritual community, and I'm sure it's not this way. Like these are not, these are generalizations. I want to make sure like anything that I say right now, like people know that I'm making generalizations and I'm aware of that. But I wonder, right, when we're doing spiritual practice and like connecting ourselves to that which is greater than us, when we're using words like good or bad or pure, unpure, we're expecting a lot from ourselves. If we are in some ways rejecting our humanity, right? If we're more like comfortable kind of being like up, like in the ascendant place versus like here on planet Earth in our humanity and our messiness, right? Which is like such a big part of like our growth and our path and our journey is to be present with the messy, uncomfortable stuff that can be, we don't have to put labels on it, good or bad, but like it's the discomfort, right? It's the human experience.
Yeah.
And so I think
I
when we are putting this massive pressure again on ourselves to have the perfect diet and to only eat clean foods, and I know some people are ethical vegans, but you know, like to only eat like from this like narrow list of foods, and to maintain that, I think in many ways that we're rejecting our humanity. We're expecting perfectionism out of ourselves, and perfectionism is very much associated with objectification, in my opinion, because as human beings, we were never meant to be perfect. We were never meant to be like clones of one another, right? Like, or there's no like model for like the ideal human being, right? We're meant to be messy and complex, and we're meant to mess up and learn and grow. And then I just find too that like for myself specifically, and I see this for other people, you know, the disordered eating, right? When we're like cutting out all of these foods, or maybe moving towards a place of orthorexia where there's an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, we might think that we're doing it from this place of like, oh, I just wanted my body to be this pure, clean temple. But I wonder if we actually look at like how much of that is coming from this place of like, oh, I'm not actually attuned to my inherent goodness. I'm not actually attuned to like my worth,
desire
right?
too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like I'm not
yeah.
attuned to my desire. I'm attuned to like somebody else's or something else's expectation of me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know it's so, again, coming back to that idea of like treating your body like a machine, I can just relate to that in yoga, you know, like, all right, my body's a temple. Let me, you know, hold my arms up and breathe mindfully for as long as I can. Right. Like,
Yeah.
but really coming from a place of like, what am I, the feeling, like this is tough to stay with the feelings. It really is tough to stay with how your body feels, especially because, you know, the first noble truth of Buddhism, but whatever, I think all religions speak to it, is there's an uncomfortable nature to reality. And so much of this I feel that these food rules come out of like, okay, let me compartmentalize that uncomfortable, and I'm just gonna do the good stuff, and I'm gonna keep this little container. And what I'm picking up from you, and I love, and is the non-judgment. Like, I feel, you know, the Dalai Lama said like non-judgment was like the essence of his religion, or the compassion. I forget, something like that.
Yeah.
But I feel so much coming from you, like this non-judgment, and especially in this day and age too. I mean, right? Like left and right, and all this stuff. And I'm just struck very deeply by the power of non-judgment, and like what that actually means, and being able to hold uncomfortable feelings in space, being able to not push away automatic thoughts that come in, you know, like this power of non-judgment is just, I'm just very struck by it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something else that's coming to me too, as you're saying that, is like when I think about spiritual path, right? And I think about like for myself specifically in Christianity, like the ultimate goal for me taking certain actions for myself or my body, doing things and not doing things, was so that I would get into this place called heaven. Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I have deep respect for people who follow that path. And that's a belief that they have, that there's like some alternate reality that they're going to go to after they die. However, for me, when I think about heaven and the invitation that I think Jesus actually had for us as a spiritual teacher, was to actually bring heaven down to earth. Right. And so instead of taking all of these actions for my body, trying to be perfect, trying to be clean, trying to be pure, so that then I can one day be rewarded with like this paradise in heaven. Right. It's like, how can I actually like live and enjoy and like be free and liberated and bring heaven to earth here in my body now? And so much of that for me and the clients that I work with is about like disconnecting from the rules, from the expectations, from the shoulds, from the labels, right? So that we can be connected deeply to our sovereignty and our truth, and act and live from that place.
And like, honestly too, like as a clinician, I'm always trying to improve my skills. How do you, I really do a good job with the cravings, like the mindful catching cravings, dealing with the guilt and shame afterwards. Sometimes with food rules, I get a little caught sometimes. How do you talk with clients? Do you, because some of the times people don't know they have food rules, or they are like kind of in this allergy mindset. No, I'm allergic to it. There's like medical reasons. And there can be this wall that's like, I'm struggling with food, but I'm not willing to give up this food rule.
Oof.
Like any advice you got for me there?
Yeah. And it's interesting, like the spectrum of client that I'll work with, some come in with like an understanding of intuitive eating, and they're like, I am ready. Right.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Take me there. Let's practice unconditionally. Exactly. I'm going to go full honeymoon phase of intuitive eating and unconditional permission to eat. And like, that's part of their process. The pendulum will do the swing as it's naturally meant to do, because that's what happens. We give ourselves unconditional permission to eat. We might start to enjoy all of the foods that we, quote unquote, were off limits to us before intuitive eating. And we might find ourselves eating a lot of those foods and maybe getting to a point of like uncomfortably full, but like we stick to the process and we trust. And then eventually our bodies learn to balance themselves out, and there's that trust is built. And it's like, okay, like I know I have access to those foods. Like I can eat that whenever I want, right? I don't have to like eat past the point of fullness or the point of discomfort, because I know I have access to that, right? And that tends, like there's challenges with that client too, but like that's a process. It's
situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
For the client that comes in who maybe has a history with allergies or has a lot of blocks around food rules, and there's this belief of like, but I don't want to be unhealthy, right? That's what it kind of comes down to. With them, I start very small. I start very, very small. And I remind them of why they're here. Because it's like, okay, has that been working? Right? Has the rules, has the fear, has the restrictions up until this point, has that been working? Right? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah. Because otherwise I should probably like give you your money back. Like, why are you working with me? Like if it was working, you wouldn't have said yes to working with me. Right.
Yeah.
And so from that place, I'll start very, very small with them. So it's like, okay, I had one client who had experienced an autoimmune condition where it was now in remission, and she had, kind of gone like a very, very extreme route and had cut out a lot of foods. And she was ready to come back to like, okay, eating more intuitively. And so we started with one food. We're like, okay, we're going to bring cheese back in. Like we're going to allow you to have unconditional permission to eat cheese. And so she did for like a week. She was like, okay, I can eat cheese. I can eat cheese. I can eat cheese. And she like was eating cheese. And then within a week, she's like, okay, I did it. Okay. I like cheese. I definitely don't need it with every meal. I definitely am going to like, I'm definitely going to say that I'm allowed to have it, but I don't need to eat it all the time. Great. Okay. Cheese. Great. Okay. Next, grains, right? We're going to bring some grains back in. We're going to practice with that. And again, there's stuff that will come up for people inevitably around like the good or the bad, but like I'll generally start very small with them. Like, what are you willing? Where are you willing to stretch yourself? Where are you willing?
What's a safe food? And exactly. a little scary. When, let's say, I guess it would be important as well to say like if someone loses control, I could see like, I fully understand the process. If someone loses control, I could see like the house of cards falling down. Like I gave myself unconditional permission to eat, like this cheese, and then I ate way too much of it and went out of control. This just isn't for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I need the rules. I got to have that sense of control, right?
Got to have that sense of control, right? And paradoxically, like losing control,
it's in reaction to control.
Yeah. But like, how any words on how you prevent the house of cards from falling down when someone is starting the unconditional eating journey? They pick a safe food, they give themselves permission to eat, and then it didn't go perfectly. They overeat. Like, how do you set expectations, and then how do you manage that whole process?
Yeah, I want to answer that question. One more quick thing I want to say about just before I lose it, because I think it's important for the client who's fearing unhealth from this process, right, is to actually reframe that as the way that I'm treating my body right now, where I'm restricting my body, where I'm not trusting my body, can we actually consider that that's the unhealthy position? And that for me to take these measures, to challenge myself a little bit, to offer myself a different foods and a variety of foods, that's actually the healthier choice for me, right? For someone who has a history of disordered eating, it's actually the healthier choice to choose, right?
That's
so
true.
I want to make sure that I just name that for people too, because that can tend to be a very helpful reframe for people. Like, oh, can you imagine this is a healthier choice for you right now?
Yes.
So as far as the question on, like if somebody gives themselves permission, okay, like I'm going to eat cheese now. And then they go and they eat a lot of cheese and then they feel sick and they feel uncomfortable. And they're just like, no, that's not for me. How I manage expectations, with them, and it's kind of something we touched on already, is to pre-warn them that it's part of the process. This is part of the process. This is something that, like, you might have that experience 1, 2, 3 times, right? And we're going to go into that from a place of already deciding how you're going to feel about yourself. So you're going to decide now, I'm going to enter, like, if that happens,
that's good.
Right?
That's good.
I'm going to choose compassion. I'm going to choose non-judgment. I'm going to choose to look at that with curiosity, because here's the thing with intuitive eating, and you know this, you can't fail it. Right? You can't fail it. Like, you can't fail something that's like inherently, intuitively you, right? Which is something that we're coming back to, and it's going to take some trial and error and like weeding out stuff that's like not actually yours, right? That's like conditioned. But you can't fail. It's simply feedback. And so can you get really curious in that circumstance when you ate past the point of fullness and ended up being really uncomfortable? Let me get curious about that. What did I eat that day? Oh, actually, you know what? I skipped lunch that day. Oh, wow. No wonder I ate more cheese and I ate past the point of fullness. I was actually really, really hungry and my body was in reaction to hunger. Interesting. Yes. Or did I have a really stressful day that day? And was I coming to it from a disembodied experience and I actually wasn't present and I wasn't paying attention? That part of it. Was I mindless? Was I being mindless? Was I disembodied? So much of it ends up being disembodiment.
Oh yeah, it is.
And it's like, okay, can I notice that and know that that means nothing about me as a human being, that I'm good, I'm enough, I'm worthy just as I am. And can I then put measures in place, like, oh, next time I'll choose, like, I'll like, if I had a stressful day, I'm still allowed to eat cheese, but maybe I do some breathing exercises before, or, oh, is this a reminder for me that I need to make sure that I'm eating a really nourishing lunch, right? So I'm having enough food in my body so that later I'm not reacting out of starvation.
Absolutely. I feel it.
Yeah.
I feel it. Yeah. Those expectations are, so important to set, that work, because the default is body shame, right? The default is body shame, unfortunately.
My body's bad. I can't control myself. Yeah. That's the default. We have to like work to like really decondition that and choose something else, choose compassion, choose like, oh yeah, like I'm okay. Like, I'm okay. And it's amazing how quickly things can shift when we're able to, again, like you said before, approach it from a place of non-judgment.
I feel it so much. Let's real quick, I know you talk a lot about BMI. Let's kind of switch focus and just talk about BMI and the cultural implications of that, because I feel like that's an interesting thing that might relate into the purity culture. But then we can, let's talk about that. So because we were talking, like, we talked a month ago on the phone and we talked about BMI, and that was like an issue that came up. And I know in pretty much everywhere, health is measured by BMI. I remember as a personal trainer, it's funny how everyone gets into personal training, but like, we'd have these hand measurements and we tell clients, okay, like, here's your body fat and here's your BMI. And according to this chart right here, like, this is where you're at. And there'd be red on like the heavier side, total scare tech. Anyways, BMI. So
let's myth bust the BMI, shall we?
Yes.
So first and foremost, the BMI was created by an astronomer / mathematician, not a doctor. So let's be aware of that. Like, let's consider the source. it was created never to measure an individual's health, but to measure population, right? It was never meant for an individual. It was always meant for a collective, for a population. That being said, the measurements that they took initially, how it was built, was for white male European bodies, right? They never considered women. They never considered people of color. They never considered the body diversity that exists in this world, right? It was white male European bodies. And so those three things in and of themselves is enough for me personally, and many others, to completely say that this is like a false measurement of health, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, it's something that we still use today. And so here's the thing about BMI, that that a lot of people like know this information and it's out there in the world, but like it's not talked about, and you have to wonder why. You have to wonder like what's at stake if people were to actually learn this information and know that it's actually true, because much research has been done on the BMI scale, right? And evidence has shown that 2/3 to 3/4 of people who are classified as metabolically, quote unquote, obese, right, are actually metabolically healthy. They show no signs of elevated blood pressure. They show no
that's
cholesterol.
The key. That's the key.
Yes, they don't show like cholesterol, any of those other
They're
markers.
Living in a bigger, quote unquote, body, but like what we tend to think is that all people living in a body must be suffering from all these blood, blah, 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 all these blood problems, heart problems, blah, blah, blah. Nope. But that assumption isn't true.
The assumption isn't true. And it's also contributes to the unhealth of that person, right? So studies have actually shown that weight stigma is far worse for someone's health than the weight itself.
This is,
So weight stigma is actually associated or correlated back to, right, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, depression, all of these things, right? So like that's the part of it like we really need to be looking at, right?
This is something that oftentimes when someone comments, client, person comment or whatever, they say, okay, well, basically, if I did this, then I wouldn't beat the shit out of myself, and I wouldn't, I would gain weight basically, or whatever. I'd be bad or unhealthy. But there's a powerful study. I'll link to it to you after. I'll try to put it in the show notes down below. But it's basically that weight shaming, weight stigma is what's causing it. And the funny thing is too, is that so many times a binge comes from the thought that I'm big, right? Like if it was true that a shame thought, like, oh, I'm too big, like so many times a binge comes after that, right? So it just goes to show that when there's body shame, when there's body hatred, like it causes people to give up on themselves. It causes people to isolate. It causes people to do all these things. And it's really the shame that, so.
And conversely to that, right, it's actually been shown, right, when someone is given the opportunity or finds themselves in an accepting environment where the people around them, whether it's their peers or their doctors or whoever it is accepting of them, right, and they have access to like good medical care, and they have access like stigma-free medical care, and they have, like people who genuinely care about them, they tend to take better care of themselves, right? Yeah. Like they tend to like pursue health promoting behaviors regardless of the size of their body, right? Yes. That's the health at every size model, right? By Lindo Bacon and Lucy Aphramore. Like that's that work, right? It's like when we actually approach health from a weight neutral perspective and we eliminate the body shame, right?
Yeah.
Then people tend to actually take better care of themselves regardless of the size of their bodies. Like, wow, like it's such a revolutionary idea, right? Like just be kind and accepting to people, and like they tend to take better care of themselves. So it's like that's why I'm such a big believer that we have to eliminate the stigma as best as we possibly can. And I'm gonna hear, like, I already know that there's some people that are gonna hear this and be like, nope, can't. BMI's this, and that's bad, and that's unhealthy, and I have to listen to my doctor, and like, you're not a doctor, Holly. And like, you know what? I get it, right? Yeah. I'm a health coach, right? However, what I would say to that is, okay, maybe your doctor is telling you that you need to lose weight, right? What option is that doctor offering you? Your doctor's probably offering you a diet,
Yeah.
right? Go on keto, go on paleo, do intermittent fasting, do this, right? You know what the success rate of that prescription is? 2%.
Oh, jeez.
2%, right? Diets fail 95 to 98% of the time, right? And so that in and of itself is evidence, okay, this way that we're approaching people's health and well-being is not working, right? Diets fail 95 to 98% of the time. Like, doctors, come on, like, let's come up with something else here. And I get it, like, they're like overworked and they see too many patients, but like, come on, seriously, like, that's how I feel about it. And so
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, okay, you're saying you want to feel healthier, you're saying that this is for your health, but this way, this dieting way, that's not going to work for you, right? And so can you start to well, I would just refer them to read Health at Every Size book and Intuitive Eating and Body Respect, and see like, wow, there's infinite ways to care for myself that have nothing to do with counting another damn calorie.
Yeah. I feel it. Holly, I feel your passion. I feel your expertise. Where can people find you online? What are you up to online? Tell us where people can connect with you.
Yeah, well, I love hanging out on Instagram, so that would probably be the best place to find me. You can find me at holly.toronto, and it's Toronto just like the Canadian city. And if you go to my Instagram and you go to the link in my bio, you'll see that I have a body gratitude meditation. It's something that I'm always helping bring my clients back to, is a sense of appreciation for their body. So you can download that. It's free, and that would be something like really fun way to connect and to hear more about my work, is to do that meditation. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Okay. Holly.Toronto on Instagram. I love it. Thanks so much. Let's wrap up today. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I really appreciate it.